Rebonjour, chers frères et sœurs. Nous continuons la lecture, comme je vous l'ai dit. Ce matin, le Seigneur nous a montré un des livres qu'il a choisi. Il nous parle en anglais. Nous allons donc comprendre. Ethiopia today. Ethiopia today is Ernest W. Luther. In a book, in a sophisticated world. The name Ethiopia, which dates from biblical times, still has for many a strange and exotic ring. There is, of course, a great deal about Ethiopia that is obscure. And while this book may not dispel the impression of strangeness, it will replace the vagueness with facts. Some of the following, for example, may surprise the reader. The people of Ethiopia are almost exclusively Caucasian, and the Negro were formerly hunted down and captured for use as slaves. The state religion of Ethiopia is Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church was established in the 4th century AD. And it is generally accepted by scholars as authentic that 2 small boys were responsible for the conversion of this part of the world to Christianity. No adequate surveys have been made of Ethiopia's gold and other minerals, and despite some 10 years of drilling for oil and United States investment of 10 billion US dollar, only dry wells have been produced so far. Ethiopia's main export crop is coffee, and the national prosperity depend in large part on fluctuations in world coffee market. So the book is standard length number 10 10 to 56. This book is plastic clear lifetime book jacket cover, but it was a little bit damaged, so I cannot read completely the page. And Luther is a present at statistic advisor. Oh, no problem. It is from Tehran. We will see if I can have it the introduction in the book, inside the book, then I will. Let us read what is the subject of today. On page 99, chapter 8, we have the introduction in 1998, page chapter 8 of the book. Banking and currency. That is where the Lord sent me to read. And let us see, because we have to know the African currency. The monetary side of Ethiopia's economy, although small in relation to the total value of output, has nevertheless for some time required the use of certain banking facilities, especially for the proper conduct of the foreign trade. Proper conduct of foreign trade. Such facilities have existed for a little over half a century. The book was published for the first time in 1958. The Stanford University Press, California, and London of Oxford University Press by the Board of Trustees of the Leyland Stanford Junior University and the Library of Congress, catalog card number 58-7842. It was printed in the United States of America. They have two dates. The first published in 1958, and the second is the third printing, 1961. So, before we move, I have to tell you that we are on chapter 8 of this book, which is banking and currency. The Lord knows that the people who are now in UN are talking about business. That is their main purpose. So God wants us to understand the banking and currency because the African know only about banking. They don't know about currency. And they don't even remember that the currency started in Africa. Paper currencies, coin currencies, everything was firstly produced in Africa. Okay, let us read. It is said that the first Ethiopian bank, the Bank of Abyssinia, was established in 1900 under control of the National Bank of Egypt. Business was very slow. In fact, operations were conducted at a loss until the completion of the railway to Addis Ababa in 1917, when conditions gradually began to improve. In 1931, the Bank of Abyssinia was bought out from Egyptian control by the Emperor Haile Selassie, and a purely Ethiopian institution, the Bank of Ethiopia, was established in its place. It was short-lived, its activities being brought to a close by the Italians in 1935-1936. During the occupation, the Italians set up their own banks, branches of the Banco di Roma. Banco di Roma. But these, in turn, were forced to close upon the defeat of the Italian forces by British and Patriot troops in 1941. The most urgent and immediate banking requirements were then met for a time by the establishment of a branch of Barclays Bank, DCNO, in the capital. Barclays Bank, Banco di Roma, Italian bank. Barclays Banks was established in the capital. The restored Ethiopian government, however, wanted an Ethiopian bank, and in 1942 replaced Barclays Bank with a new institution, the State Bank of Ethiopia. Voilà la présence du Seigneur derrière moi. Comme vous voyez, je continue la lecture. The State Bank of Ethiopia is a corporate entity. It was established by imperial proclamation on August 26, 1942. But it did not come into operation until the following year. The original capital investment, fully subscribed by the Ministry of Finance, amounted to 1 million. Marie Theresa thalers, the currency then in force, along with the East African shillings. Remember, Marie Theresa thalers, the currency then in force, along with the East African shilling. The charter of the State Bank was published in November 1943, nearly 8 months after the bank had opened for business, and outlined in detail the powers of functions of the new institution. Final control of the bank's affairs was vested in the hands of the government. Although active direction of its day-to-day operations was placed in the hands of a governor and subordinate officers presided over by an Ethiopian board of directors. The state bank became the central bank of the empire, being empowered to issue banknotes and coins as agent of the Ministry of Finance, and upon the subsequent withdrawal of Barclays Bank, it also became the sole bank in the country to engage in normal commercial banking transactions. A branch of the bank, a branch of the bank, de l'Indochine, Banque de l'Indochine, a branch of the Banque de l'Indochine was opened in February 1943, but it does not normally accept deposits, and it is not permitted to engage in the sale or purchase of foreign exchange. Since Ethiopian Eritrean Federation, several branches of Italian banks previously operating in Eritrea have been allowed to continue in business, but their activity has been greatly curtailed as a result of the state bank's monopoly of foreign exchange operations. In recent years, it has been announced that foreign banking competition will shortly be welcomed in Ethiopia, although under what terms and conditions is not yet plain, as the long-pending banking law of the country has not yet been promulgated. The State Bank of Ethiopia began operations in April 1943 under a Canadian governor, Mr. C.S. Collier. Since then, it has had a number of foreign, mostly American governors, under whose direction the State Bank of Ethiopia has become one of the most successful financial institutions in Ethiopia. It may be remarked with some truths, however, that its monopoly position in the field may have assured it of success in any event. When the bank first began operations, Business was conducted on a rather small scale. The number of employees totaling only about 15. In 1956, this number had risen to over 600. Services offered transfer, letter of credit, foreign exchange, and loans against mortgages, merchandise, and personal guarantee. Overdraft facilities were also extended to a few firms. The bank's early years were marked by fairly rapid growth, reflecting a concomitant expansion in all phases of economic activity, both government and private. The bank showed a loss for the year 1943, owing largely to costs involved in starting operations and opening branches. But since then, it has earned a profit in each fiscal period. Correspondent accounts were opened with numerous banks abroad. The State Bank currently maintains about 3,000 such accounts in some 18 countries of the world. An issue department was added to the bank in July 1945 by virtue of the currency and legal tender proclamation of that year, and customer services and the number of branches were gradually increased. Saving facilities were made available to the public by the head office in January 1946, and since then have been extended to most branches. The extension of banking facilities into the various provinces of the empire has been a significant development in Ethiopian banking. Some of the branches are not commercially profitable, but they have been maintained in the remote areas so that the people may become acquainted with Ethiopian currency and banking facilities, and banking facilities. The branches provide all banking services, but must refer requests for foreign exchange to Addis Ababa, a time-consuming procedure. It's noted that the Eritrean branches, except ASAP, are under the control of the Asmara office. That is a note. Let's continue reading. Loan activity is low in most branches, and a number of them do not have more than a bookkeeper, a manager, and a large sum of cash, plus a few currency accounts. 10 of the 16 branches operated at a loss in 19 1954, and 1955, and about the same number in 1956 and 1957. Nevertheless, the branches considered as a whole have produced a, a thumping profit in recent years as a result of the highly profitable operations of the Asmara and Dir Dawa offices. The amount of cash held in the branches is extraordinary in a relation both to their size and to what is held at the head office. With the exception of the largest branches, Asmara and Dirdawa, branch holdings of cash represent in most cases well over 19%, sometimes up to 19% of assets, compared with less than 25% for the head office. Up to 1990s to 1990% of assets, compared with the less than 25% for the head office. With an extremely low level of provincial borrowing from banks and small deposits on the part of the public, it may be asked why such huge cash holdings are necessary, or how they arise. The answer is simple, brothers and sisters. Listen. The answer is simple. There is no checking system to speak of, no popularly accepted way to transfer the ownership of money without transporting physical cash. Outside of a few major towns, payment by check is virtually unknown in Ethiopia. Even certified checks of the state bank have been refused by the customs authorities at Asap and Masawa. Hence, merchants doing business in the interior are required to pay and collect for purchases and sales in cash, with metallic currency preferred. According to the season and the rhythm of the market, cash flows into rural branch banks as merchants deposit sales proceeds for transfer to the capital or elsewhere, and flows out again as transfers are made in the opposite direction to pay for the purchase of agricultural produce. Payment in cash is required since native growers have, for the most part, no accounts with the local bank. The whole process is very cumbersome. An enormous amount of time and effort is spent in counting currency notes and coins and transporting them back and forth. Even at Addis Ababa, payment by check is the exception rather than the rule. And it is common practice for merchants to arrive at the bank each morning with suitcases full of $1 notes for counting and deposit. With the steady addition of new branches and expansion of facilities and accounts at head office, the position of the state bank in the economic life of the country has become increasingly important. The bank has grown with the needs of trade and has earned a reputation for financial soundness and conservative banking practice. Its profit reached Ethiopian ETH 3.1 million of dollars in 1955 compared to the only a few $100,000 in 1944. Its first full year of operations and its total assets more than quadrupled in the decade 1945 and 55. Deposits in the same period grew from Ethiopian dollar 12.7 million to Ethiopian dollars 112.8 million. Government deposits constitute somewhat less than 60% of the 1955 total. Amounts held in savings and time deposit accounts made up some 13%. Loans and advances have also increased over the years, but here the factor of growth has been much less impressive. In part, this is a reflection of the relative scarcity of local investment opportunities. But it is also due to the bank's highly conservative loan policy. For example, it has been the practice to extend mortgage loans for a very short period only at high rates of interest. And even today, the maximum maturity of such loans is a mere 4 years. We have note 2. I will read it later. The note. This must discourage many small builders from borrowing. Despite the high rate of defaults among Ethiopian borrowers, a more liberal loan policy will seem to be desirable, both from the point of view of stimulating economic growth and from that of more fully utilizing the bank's earning assets. Approximately 8% of the Ethiopian dollar 15.8 million of outstanding loans and advances at the end of 1955 had been made to the government, which is exempt from the payment of interest. In early years, government loans accounted for a very large part of the total, but there has been a definite tendency away from direct government borrowing from the bank. There, theoretically, such direct borrowing has been limited by law since 1950 to a total Ethiopian dollar 3 million, in addition to permissible indirect borrowing of Ethiopian dollar 2 million. However, this government still may legally obtain funds from the bank through the sale of its promissory notes, termed treasury bills, as described in chapter 5. Up to the end of 1955, some Ethiopian dollar 62 million had been so borrowed, interest-free, and with no obligation of redemption, and another Ethiopian dollar 25 million was taken in March 1956, thus sharply cutting into the excess reserves of the issue department. This stood at 36.8% of the currency fund reserve at the end of March 1956, not much above the 30% minimum required by law. Thus, the government took from the bank to supplement its revenue from other sources a total of nearly Ethiopian 78 million in the 6 years prior to the April 1956, out of a total of Ethiopian dollars 110 million in foreign exchange accumulated during the same period as the result of successive balance of payments surpluses. Most of this went to swell the total of government deposits with the state bank. Very little was invested in capital projects. As a consequence, the inflationary effect of this sizable increasement in the money supply, which stood at some Ethiopian dollar 241 million as of December 31, 1955, has been negligible. In view of the fact that these funds have been left largely idle, with the government's cash position at the state bank very satisfactory, it is difficult to understand the purpose behind the borrowing of an additional Ethiopian dollars 25 million in March 1956. Total earnings of state bank were largely in 1555 than in any previous year. Its net profit that year was below the 1954 peak. However, owing to the setting in 1955 of a large provision for bad and doubtful debts that had not been carried as an expense item before. Income from foreign exchange transactions constituted the bank's major source of earnings, 53% of the total, as in other years. Interest and discount earned on loans and advances, as well as on foreign investments, accounted for 30% of total earnings. Commissions and other income accounted for 12%. Roughly half of the total interest earned by the bank derives from its foreign investments, which are mostly in long-term US dollar bonds of the IBRD. As a result of balance of payment surplus, which Ethiopia again enjoyed in 1955, Ethiopian dollar 14.3 million compared to Ethiopian dollar 22.7 million in 1954 and a peak of Ethiopian dollar 44.9 million in 1953. Foreign monetary reserves of the central bank reached a new year-end high of Ethiopian dollar 151.4 million on December 31, 1955. 9% above the corresponding 1944 figure of Ethiopian dollars 139.1 million. The proportion of US dollar holding at the end of 1955 rose to 87% of the combined reserves of foreign currency securities and foreign balance, compared to 82.5% of year before and to less than 20% in 1950. If gold reserves are added, the proportion is even higher. At the end of 1955, the state bank's capital had grown to 16 times the original investment. There is no doubt of the strong financial position of the state bank. There is no doubt of the strong financial position the state bank has attained, particularly over the last 60 years, as the result of heavy coffee exports. By the same token, however, a serious drop in coffee prices could mean trouble, and coffee may someday be a glut on the market owing to the heavy planting in all countries that follow it. The sharp successive price increases dating approximately from 1949. This is just one more argument for greater crop diversification and a substantial improvement in quality. In brief, the state bank's success since its inception in 1943 has been notable, but not entirely due to its own efforts. The fortunes of the export market have been decisive, and the lack of competition in the banking field has been helpful. The untrained and unexperienced Ethiopian board of directors has contributed little, although some observers have remarked that the bank's standard of operations is superior to that of comparable banks in other Middle Eastern countries. The bank's largely Ethiopian staff is ill-trained and inefficient. Many of its methods are obsolete, and its quarters are overcrowded. The bank suffers, in addition, from a seemingly unavoidable but deadly nepotism that is the lot of nearly all government and of some private operations in Ethiopia. From a lack of continuity in policy and from a regrettable lack of firmness in decision and execution. It is, however, absolutely sound financially and strong in the matter of its foreign reserves. If its policies have been over conservative, they at least have had the virtue of protecting it from dangerous fiscal ventures and have thus helped to establish it in a position of respect and authority in the eyes of both the foreign and the domestic business community. Although some form of money have been in use in Ethiopia during early time, the present fairly widespread acceptance of paper currency is of recent origin. Most of the internal trade of the country was for long carried on by means of barter, employing blocks of salt, lengths of cloth, and iron. About the middle of the 19th century, the large silver coin known as the Maria Theresa Thaler, first minted in Austria in 1751, came into circulation, and it remained the coin most generally accepted throughout the country until the currency reform in 1945. Even today, these ancient coins circulate in a few remote parts of Ethiopia, and certain taxes are received in them. Yes. Although they have long been out lowered. The Maria Theresa teller was estimated not only for its intrinsic worth, it was 83.130% silver, but for its decorative and easily recognizable design as well. About 50 million of these coins are estimated to have been in circulation on the eve of the Italian invasion of 1935. Neither the issuance of an Ethiopian metal coinage under Menelik II and Haile Selassie, nor the printing of some notes by Bank of Ethiopia prior to 1935 met with any appreciable success in replacing the silver tellers. During the occupation, the Italians attempted to introduce their own currency, the lira, but were at last compelled to prevent the complete stagnation of trade to reintroduce the Maria Theresa teller. They had purchased the master dies from Vienna in 1932. We have the note. It should perhaps be mentioned that most of the Maria Theresa tellers still in circulation in Ethiopia and other parts of Middle East do not date from the original issue, but are the product of more recent minting in Western countries. With the Italian, we go back to the reading. That was a note 3. We can also go back and read note 2 before we move. I read more. For the first time since the inception of the state bank reduced all loan interest rate by 1% point as of November 1555. This now range 6 to 8% depending on the type of loan, with mortgage loan at 7%. Yet it was the note 2 that I have to come back and read. It was said that, for example, it has been the practice for extend mortgage loans for very short period only at high rates of interest, and even today the maximum maturity of such loans is mere 4 years. Then the note said, for the first time since its inception, the state bank reduced all loan interest rate by 1% point as of November 15th, 1955. And it is said that this now range from 6 to 8% depending on the type of loan, with mortgage loans at 7%. Let us go back to our reading of page 105. We are in banking and currency. Ethiopian example. With the Italian defeat in 1941, the currency situation became more confused than ever, since the British troops that liberated the country brought with them a large quantity of East African shillings. A third currency was thus added to the two others in circulation, the lira and the Marie Theresa thaler, and all three were declared legal tender. The difficulties of the restored Ethiopian government were increased by the limitations placed on its control of the currency by the Anglo-Ethiopian Agreement of 1942. Sorry, let me drink some water. A second agreement in December 1944, however, removed these restrictions and opened the way for the establishment of a new and purely Ethiopian currency. The necessity for some such action was becoming increasingly apparent with the disruption of trade and the substantial fluctuation in the value of several currencies in terms of each other. In addition, there existed a strong tendency toward Maria Theresa thalers and to ship them out of the country in view of the rising price of silver on world markets. By the end of 1944, the Maria Theresa thaler was worth 3 East African shillings on the free market, although it had been legally pegged at only 2 shillings in 1943. The American governor of the State Bank, Mr. George Blowers, in consultation with the Ethiopian Minister of Finance, worked out the details of a new currency to be issued with the help of a large silver loan under Lend-Lease arrangement with the United States. The new currency was first issued on July 23, 1945, the Emperor's 53rd birthday. The details of the currency reform had been published the previous May in Negarit Gazeta under the title of Currency and Legal Tender Proclamation number 76 of 1945. The new law established the Ethiopian dollar, equal in value to 5.52 grains of fine gold. I repeat, the new law established the Ethiopian dollar, equal in value to 5.52 grains of fine gold, as the single monetary unit of the country. The dollar is based on the decimal system and is fixed at 40.25 United States cents. The sole right of issue is vested in issue department of the State Bank of Ethiopia, acting on behalf of the Ministry of Finance. As banking, the State Bank of Ethiopia maintains a currency fund consisting of gold, silver, and foreign assets. Foreign bank balance or readily convertible prime securities, plus those domestic obligations of the Imperial Ethiopian government, treasury bills. The original law limited the maximum proportion of treasury bill to 25% of the currency fund and minimum proportion of foreign asset to 75%. In an amendment of 1950, the required minimum foreign coverage was reduced from 70% to 30% of the note issue, and the maximum proportion of treasury bills was corresponding raised. As already indicated, the latter are themselves theoretical, secured by a pledge of fixed assets of the Ethiopian treasury equal to 110% of the obligations. In fact, however, no such pledge exists and no specific assets are anywhere pledged. The reduction in the foreign proportion of the note issue was undertaken in order to liberate a large amount of foreign exchange badly needed in the support of imports, especially since the bank's foreign reserves had suffered a blow through the British sterling devaluation of the preceding years. The reduction was well advised. However, in view of the stability of the Ethiopian dollar and the confidence that has been shown in it since its introduction 5 years before. The action released a total of Ethiopian dollars 17 million in foreign exchange for use in the support of imports and permitted a greater degree of flexibility in the money supply to meet the seasonal needs of the country's foreign trade. After the introduction of the new currency in July 1945, East African shillings continued as legal tender for another 6 months, but Maria Theresa Thalers were immediately demonetized and called in for redemption by the state bank. The demonetized thalers were treated as silver bullion and now constitute a part of legal backing. I repeat, the demonetized thalers, which mean Marie-Thérèse Thalers, were treated as silver bullion and now constitute a part of legal backing for Ethiopian currency notes. The East African shillings in circulation at the time of the currency reform were gradually redeemed by the state bank at the rate of 2 shillings per dollar. Almost 60% of the original currency reserve arose from the redemption of these notes for sterling balances in London, which were later invested in gilt age British Empire securities. Today, as mentioned earlier, the investment is almost entirely in US dollar bonds, chiefly IBRD. The remaining 40% of the original reserve came from the normal accumulation of foreign exchange balances of the State Bank of Ethiopia, acquired from merchandise exports and sale of newly mined gold abroad. The note found reserve at the end of a little less than 80 months of operations under the new currency in December 31, 1946, covered a total issue of Ethiopian dollars 39.9 million in notes composed as follows: foreign securities 80%, foreign balances 9%, silver bullion in the form of Maria Theresa Thalers 5%, and Ethiopian treasury bills 2%. By December 31, 1955, the total issue of notes has grown to Ethiopian dollar 126.4 million, composed as follows: foreign securities 5%, foreign balance 26%, silver bullion 12%, gold 8%, and Ethiopian treasury bills 49%. Thus, at the end of 1955, there was a backing of 51% in foreign assets for the note issue, compared to the 30% minimum required by law. The current issue has grown from Ethiopian 14.5 million to Ethiopian dollars 35.8 million in the same period. In addition, gross bank deposits have expanded by Ethiopian dollar 76.2 million, so that the total money supply, cash in circulation plus gross deposit, including government deposit, approximated Ethiopian dollars 241.4 million at the end of 1955, compared to Ethiopian dollars 79.3 million at the end of 1946. There is no doubt that the 1945 currency reform has enjoyed a notable and for many a wholly unexpected success. The currency system thus set up provided a much needed element of elasticity in the money supply. Previously, there had always been a severe shortage of cash at certain times of the year, coinciding with the movement of crops to market, with the issuance of the new currency tied to the needs of trade through fluctuations in the balance of payment. This difficulty was alleviated. The traditional hold of the Maria Theresa tether on the country's economic life has been broken, and a wide measure of confidence now exists in the national currency. The large expansion of the money supply has kept pace, more or less, with the needs of trade and has not been inflationary. In fact, the general level of imported goods prices is much lower today than it was when records first became available in 1947. This does not, of course, tell the whole story. The prices of some locally produced and consumed commodities rose in the post-war decade, and urban rents, particularly in the capital, approximately doubled in level during the period 1950 to 56. The prices of meats, eggs, and vegetables in urban centers have increased substantially in recent years. There are no reliable cost of living figure. One of the difficulties of measuring changes in the cost of living at various urban centers in Ethiopia arises from the existence side by side of heterogeneous income groups: American, European, Asiatics, and Native, having different consumption patterns that cannot easily be reflected in a single index. For all domestic transactions, except those relating to exports and imports, regular and consistent price quotations are simply not available. In the rural areas, monetary transactions are still the exception instead of the rule. The rule is barter, exchange of goods. Barter rule. Regular price records are available only for Addis Ababa and Asmara and are limited to internationally traded commodities. These records have been kept by the Statistics Department of the State Bank and by one or two other agencies for a number of post-war years. It is said that the State Bank has recently sought to collect price data for a number of other trading centers. That is note 6. The State Bank's indexes of export and import prices are based on transactions at the wholesale level. In the case of exports, they measure the wholesale selling prices of primary producers and are fairly representative, being gathered weekly from over a dozen different sources covering over 90% of exports and approximately 75% of imports. Representative weights are used in computing computing group and general index based on the relative value distribution of different items in the total of export or import trade, as the case may be during a 5-year base period. Both the export and import price indexes are based on the average level of prices prevailing in 1951. This appears now to have been the peak year for export prices since the war, as well as turning point in the trend of import prices. The latter, however, had been much higher in 1947 the earliest year for which import price data are available. Export prices are in some cases available back to the beginning of 1945. Since the monetary part of Ethiopia's economy is based so largely on foreign trade, it is to be expected that the general trend of both export and import prices reflects closely the price movements of the same commodities on world markets. These movements, as expressed in the term of trade, have been decidedly to Ethiopia's advantage during most of the post-war period. The terms of trade rising from 61% in 1947, 1951 equal 100 to 118.7 in 1944. In 1954. 1954. They dropped to 1960.2 in 1955. Rose to 111.7 in 1956 and later leveled off at around 100. These favorable developments have been the result of a steady long-term reduction in the cost of Ethiopian imports, mainly textiles, in conjunction with a sharp rise in the price of the country's chief export, coffee. The future trend will depend largely on price developments in the coffee market. Export prices on the whole rose from the beginning of 1945 to the end of 1947 and then declined through most of 1949. The outbreak of the Korean War in June 1950 gave a renewed stimulus to commodity prices and lifted them to a post-war War II peak of year later. Since then, reflecting the gradual subsidence and eventual disappearance of war-scarred buying and inventory accumulation, world commodity prices have in general been on the decline. I read again from the future trend will depend largely on price developments in the coffee market. Export prices on the whole rose from the beginning of 1945 to the end of 1947 and then declined through most of 1949. The outbreak of the Korean War in June 1950 gave a renewed stimulus to commodity prices and lifted them to a post-World War II peak a year later. Since then, reflecting the gradual subsidence and eventual disappearance of war, scare buying, and inventory accumulation, world commodity prices have in general been on the decline. Out of import sites, Ethiopian wholesale prices have descended some distance from their apparently abnormally high levels in 1947. They too responded to the stimulus of Korea, reaching a peak in November 1951. By 1956, they had declined an average of 30% from that peak. Although it is difficult to isolate the influence of the worldwide currency devaluations of September 1949, they do not seem to have produced a measurable effect on the trend of Ethiopia wholesale prices. Since Ethiopia was not among the devaluing nations, the immediate effect of her refusal to devalue was an appreciation of her currency in terms of the currencies of those countries which had devalued. With the prices of her goods determined in world markets, Ethiopian exporters received less in terms of Ethiopian dollars for their products, but this was offset by a rise in the sterling price of these goods under the stimulus of increased demand from the United States and other countries which had not devalued. The net result was that the general level of export prices remained much the same after as before devaluation until the start of hostilities in Korea 9 months later. On the import side, the devaluations appear to have slightly accelerated the downtrend in prices that had been in evidence, with one minor interruption since quotations first became available in June 1947. Data for the third quarter of 1957 placed the General Export Index for Addis Ababa at 76.1 in 1951 equal 100, and the General Import Index at 70.6 in 1951 equal 100. Import goods have been remarkable import goods have been remarkably steady over the last several years. The General Export Index, on the other hand, has fluctuated considerably with the ups and downs of the coffee market. Price trends in other commodities were mixed during 1953 to 55, with oil seeds generally rising. Heads and pulse, or heights and pulse declining, and the rest fairly stable. Although with considerable seasonal fluctuations, yes, the price of major import commodity all showed steady to slightly declining trends over the same period, although tire prices rose about 7.5% in 1955. Paper and paper products, after dropping sharply in the first half of 1955, rose just as sharply in the second half, but later declined below the level of 1953 and 1954. A weak form of price control is legally in effect in Ethiopia, based on maximum permissible market ups over cost. From time to time, lists of maximum permissible retail prices for individual lots of goods recently imported are published by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Enforcement is generally left up to the public through the medium of complaints to official channels, since there are only a handful of government inspectors. In any event, the attempt control is limited to Addis Ababa and does not affect the rest of the country. Actually, there has been no real need for price controls. Competition among retailers has been adequate, to judge from the steady decline in prices of imported goods. Occasionally an unscrupulous merchant takes advantage of a temporary shortage of jack up price, and the public complains, but few cases of this sort have been come up for trial. The public is, in any event, apathetic and largely ignorant of the existence of any form of price control. Ethiopia is among the numerous countries of the world that practice exchange control. The establishment of an effective system of exchange control came about in September 1949, just before the worldwide currency devaluations. Legally, some form of control had existed since October 1942, and this was somewhat strengthened by an amendment of June 1948 to the Currency Proclamation of 1942. However, no regulations, methods, or procedures of control had been set up. I repeat, however, no regulations, methods, or procedures of control had been set up, foreign traders were largely informed of the law, and its application and enforcement consequently remained pretty much in abeyance. By legal notice number 127 of 1949, this situation was altered. Detailed instructions were laid down on the mechanics of control. The State Bank of Ethiopia was declared the sole authorized dealer in foreign exchange, and in accordance with this provision of Exchange Control Office was set up in the bank. The introduction of exchange control was considered necessary in order to strengthen the US dollar position, to limit the use of foreign exchange for non-essential imports, and to prevent capital flights. Ethiopia's exchange control is characterized by exchange licensing for all payments, surrender of all foreign exchange receipts, and prescription of currencies for exchange payments and receipts. There has been a great liberalization of all restrictions since the end of 1953 in view of the plenitude of exchange, and almost all requests for foreign exchange are now freely granted. Some restrictions, however, remain. These are on invisibles and on capital transactions, where limits are set according to the individual income position of the applicant. The tendency, however, is to be very liberal. In case in which the applicant has a special contract entitling him to remit more, exceptions are observed. All transactions in foreign exchange must be effected through the State Bank of Ethiopia. All payment abroad and export are subject to the supervision of the exchange controller, whose office is a department of the State Bank. Payments outside Ethiopia must be effected in foreign exchange appropriate to the country of the recipient, and foreign exchange from export must be surrendered in the appropriate currency, usually that the country of final destination. In the case of coffee, surrender of exchange must be at least 50% in US dollars, unless it can be proved that the final destination of the coffee is a non-dollar area, in which case payment in the currency of the country of final destination or in transferable sterling is accepted. There are no import licenses, but all imports require exchange licenses or Franco Valuto certification. As indicated, such exchange is freely granted for all goods in appropriate currency of the country of their origin, or in a softer currency when ordered through a third country. Payment may be by cash against documents, mail transfer, or telegraphic transfer, but letter of credit is preferred. Payments for invisibles also require exchange licenses. Licenses for invisibles connected with trade transactions are allowed on the same basis as the goods to which they relate. Persons traveling abroad are granted foreign exchange in the currency of the country of destination on a case-to-case basis. They may take with them a maximum of Ethiopian dollar 100 in Ethiopian bank notes. Exchange for education is granted within reasonable limits. In each case, exchange for such purposes as charity and maintenance is granted in modern amounts to residents not permanently domiciled in Ethiopia for remittance to their own country. The transfer of reasonable amount of dividends and similar payments due to non-residents is permitted in the currency of the original investment. Family maintenance remittance may range from Ethiopia 105 to Ethiopian 245 a month, depending on the annual income of the applicant. A special contract employees may remit more when the permanently living Ethiopia an applicant may transfer abroad his assets to the extent of 10,000 liras a year. In applying for an export license, an exporter must indicate the amount of foreign exchange he expects to receive. The exporter remains liable for the full sales price of the proceeds. The granting of an exchange license by the exchange controller enables the goods to pass through the customs. The licensing system is used to ensure that foreign exchange receipts are surrendered to the State Bank of Ethiopia and that export proceeds are received in appropriate exchange. In due time, exporters must surrender at the official rate the promised amount of currency. The exporter must also produce a certified sales certificate so that it may be verified whether he has in fact surrendered the total sale proceeds. In the case of import, there is close cooperation between the bank's import control department and Ethiopian customs to see to it that no goods are imported which do not have either an exchange license or franco valuto statement to support them, and that the customs and exchange control valuation coincide. Exchange receipts from invisible must also be surrendered. Person may bring into Ethiopia a maximum of Ethiopian dollars 150 in Ethiopian banknotes. All foreign exchange must be declared by travelers on entry, and its subsequent use or export is subject to license. All foreign exchange receipts in the form of capital must be surrendered. There is no discrimination regarding the currencies in which foreign investments are accepted. All payments abroad on account of capital are subject to individual exchange licenses. Foreign exchange is granted for payment abroad of matured capital obligations of temporary residence. Other types of capital transfer as handled on a case-to-case basis. Aside from the exchange control system as described above, there are no direct controls on trade, and in particular, no import quota. Ethiopia's exchange controls have enjoyed a fair amount of success and have succeeded in building up large official reserves of US dollars. Unfortunately, optimum use has not been made of these reserves, and as we have seen, there has been virtually no application of them to public capital development. The country has relied instead mainly on foreign loans in recent years, to a large extent on loans from the International Bank. If it seems odd that money should be borrowed at 4 and 5%, which could have been obtained much more cheaply and which with less difficulty from the sizable foreign reserve of the central bank, it should be remembered that when the IBRD loan were contracted in 1950 to 1951, foreign reserves were still small. After 60 years of mounting reserves, however, resulting in cumulative balance of payments surplus since the beginning of 1950 of some Ethiopians 110 million. It is hard indeed to see why the government should have sought additional large loans from the International Bank and from the Export-Import Bank of Washington. A considerable part, even the entire amount of these loans, amounting in the aggregate to US dollars 39 million, could have been financed at a substantial saving in interest out of the large foreign reserves of the state bank. If the beneficial results of exchange control are to be voluntarily relinquished in this blunt manner, one wonders why much strength remains in the standard argument for such controls as method of accumulating foreign capital for economic development. Since the almost complete relaxation of exchange restrictions at the end of 1953, the State Bank's Exchange Control Office has been exercising a largely supervisory and licensing function. As the system remains one based on individual allocations of exchange, a certain arbitrariness is unavoidable. Despite the recent liberalization in regard to what is allowed for travel abroad or for family remittance, this varies with the nationality and contractual status of the applicant, and it fares more limited in absolute amount in most cases. Capital transfers are also regulated so that a person seeking to liquidate his holdings in Ethiopia may do so only gradually within the limits of an acceptable amortization schedule. These remaining restrictions are annoying, as is the red tape and delay involved in applying for an exchange license, but they have become such an accepted part of the regulation of economic activity by governments through the world that their justification is seldom challenged any longer on theoretical ground. We have read the banking theory, system, and practice from page 1908 to 114. The banking and currency. Then later we will pass to industry and development in the next video. Brothers and sisters, the Lord be with you and all your activities regarding trade, Barclay, money and currencies, goods, imports and exports. God is in the middle of you there in the United States whole to bring equality, justice, and sovereignty of all countries in the world, smaller or bigger. All of you in front of God now As you are there, you are equal. Hallelujah. This is the message God is sending. No more war. No more killing. No more exploitation of man by other men. All of you, you are poor in that hole. From the USA to the last Ethiopian countries, all of you, God says you are poor, and he will show you how are you poor in front of his eyes from today. Let us thank God. He is God, the powerful God. Upon all of your powers, small gods, he calls you. From now, in this 21st century, named African century, Africa will recover its sovereignty, its currency, its liberty, freedom, wisdom, according to God's decisions, not mine. I'm just reading the books that you remember. He was choosing books. He also chose this book. Mine, Sorrowful Run. Thank you, Lord. Because we are les inconnus d'Afrique. Now, God brings the value of his people to your understanding who is God. The Lamb that is sitting here on my shoulder, right hand, is bringing all that Africa needs to understand what you have been hiding to them. You, the power of the word. He is the power of the earth and the heavens. He is your creator. He is Yahweh, providence of all of you. He controls all your lives. Yes. He can say this morning, tomorrow you will not live anymore, and it will be done. He is called the Almighty God. He's the one who sent his word around the world. And he was speaking with our ancestors face to face till Noah. After the flood. He's speaking to us again today through his servant. Me, I don't know anything about what God is choosing to give me. When he gives me, he directs me, he inspires me, he shows me. I just have to transfer it to you. Brothers and sisters who are in the chain of slavery, take your time. Be patient. Pray. Manoron. God came to turn his word that you have turned it upside down. I'm reading in my thesis. Yes, I told you what is the importance of knowing ourselves. In my book, Future Africa Sub-Saharan Takeoff in Light of Practice in Chinese Economic Development, A Divine Mission, Dr. Ndomo Melingi Therese Aisha. Aisha is my Chinese name, which was given to me by an older woman. But she said Alisha. And she said Alisha was the person who will come back before the arrival of Christ. This woman is like Alisha. Then, that was in Qingdao, 1998. When I arrived in Qingdao, you can see how God is clinking. And when you read in Genesis, you read Exodus, you read Judge, you read also King's books, you will find out by reading Aisha, which means in Chinese, a great, beautiful lady, full of love for the humanity. That was the first explanation when I entered in the university. Because when you enter officially in the university, not to go and learn language, no, for a long period of study, they will give you a name, which is exactly what you are. Yes. And then, by proceeding, we discover that that name of Aisha means A, African, I, international, S, societies, H, home, and A, abroad. Can you imagine the name of the person who is speaking to you? And now we have discovered in this book of Ethiopian Today, the former currency of Ethiopia was named Marie-Thérèse Feller. Currency. And my name, as I said, I discovered it in Ndomo writings of Mali. The people who brought that writing system, old writing system that I discovered in China, were called Mandeng. Mandeng. God has kept everything alive to confuse the small leaders of the world. Let us read. Ndomo Melingi features sub-Saharan takeoff in light of practice in Chinese economic development. Just the part that you have to understand. After a preliminary 22 years achievement of a combined theoretical and practical worldwide research works and academic studies, this framework stands towards further endless research and studies in international economics and academic interactions around the world to enhance source links for the ultimate suppression of the poverty curtain by the year 2030. I will recall here that since 1985, all the previous predictions by the author have been true. Let us watch out for the fulfillment of this last one. Call it, quote, the end of the wrong world, rebuilding a real world. Ndomo Melingi speaking. The end of the wrong world, rebuilding a real world. In her book, page 3. Because our world seems to be turned upside down, to follow John Agnew and Stuart Corbridge in his Dynamics of Geopolitical Disorder. I give you reference after finishing this paragraph. The current trend to globalization, for example, is qualitatively different mode of restructuring based upon the emergence of a new system of accumulation which has been called global for dish. This involves new generation of mass production and mass consumption to the world scale, where marriage is consummated through extended circuits of international trade and investment and credit creation. Each geographical order is involved with a particular geopolitical orientation. This is true today. This can be seen in the political and economic distribution between North and South. Although there are gradually some market sectors in an intensely competitive and unstable capital world economy. I have to read again. Although there are gradually more market sectors in an intensely competitive and unstable capital world economy, our epoch system needs a change. And the world is characterized by a global economy in which no single country economy has a dominating role and in which many of the major factors, such as banks and transnational corporations, are global in outlook and orientation. It is this globalization of the world economy that provides the context of relative decline of the world economy and hence for explaining in large part the decline for the bitter war geopolitical order. What could be the evidence of this? In the first outlook, there has been a major revival of world trade over the past decade that has created a system of trade links in which most of the world state-run economies, including the heretofore isolate, are deeply involved. The main circuits of this system in 1970s were as follows. First, a U.S. manufacturing trade deficit with East Asia, say cars, electronics, apparels, balanced by surplus 1980s $20 billion. With Europe, computers, areopaths. Yes. 2. A net U.S. trade surplus with Latin America offset but an outflow of U.S. direct investment, especially to Brazil and Mexico. 3. European manufacturing deficits with the United States and East Asia balanced by surplus with Africa. 4. Japan's surpluses with Europe and the United States balanced by payments for energy and raw materials and the export of capital to other parts of East Asia and elsewhere. You can also see that was quoted by Davies in 1985, the year that our Lord called his servant, speaking to you today. Ndomo Melingi, Therese, Aisha. 2 given names are added to my name that my father and my mother gave me. My name is Ndomo Melingi. The 2 given names are Teresa, Therese in French speaking, and Aisha, my Chinese given name. And my Muslim name is Aisha, I with A-I trimmer, C-H-A. It is my Muslim name, given name in China by the Lord himself, who sends me to the embassy of the Islamic Muslim, I can say. To go and meet him, but I went there to meet business. to discuss business. But the Lord came, as I'm telling you today, as he came to that embassy. Now he's with you there in your hole. He's listening to you. And he's speaking to you. Some of you will dream receiving messages from God after this meeting. God bless all of you. I wanted to close the book. He said, no, I have to introduce this. Let's just finish the reading. The 1970s witnessed widespread recognition of the world as a soul, interconnecting whole. The 1980s have shown that this whole is not operating as a self-sustaining system. In short, we appear to reside in a world in a great mess. Crisis, crisis, crisis. Manifesting itself in hunger, poverty, debt, conflict, statelessness, and war, as well as in the accelerated degradation of the natural environment. This dissertation goes beyond the economy to show the interlinking nature of global, regional, and local problems, and further that these are not uniquely economic, ecological, political, or social, but all this and more for the human being. This small part just illuminating the challenges and chilling epilogue reminds us that our planet is big enough for peace, but small for war. Our planet that was turned upside down needs not just an economic readjustment, but a real world system project for the benefit of all. Why African sub-Saharan countries cannot develop themselves in the global market? I quoted and I asked it on page 4. The system and deterioration economic crisis in sub-Saharan Africa remains the significant issues of the 21st century. Although the 1980s and 1990s have been a time of stagnating incomes, declining employment, and worsening poverty for many third world countries, nowhere has the situation been more severe than in sub-Saharan Africa. At the heart of the African impasse is an inexorable economic decline, a drop in per capita incomes, rapid increases in population, the loss of export revenues, and the burden debts issues, the curtailment of foreign investment, the destruction of fragile ecosystems, and the inability of many countries even to feed their people and meet other basic human needs. The overall interdependence and the growth of third world markets need a worldwide economic reform. We live in an increasingly market needs a worldwide economic reform. We live in an increasingly interdependent world, and perhaps soon or later we will live in a world without borders. To borrow from the title of a provocative book of the 1970s, Lester Brown, 1972. For third world countries, especially sub-Saharan Africa, dependence on rich nations is and has always been a stark fact of economic life. It is the principal reason for their heightened interest in promoting greater individual and collective self-reliance. At the same time, the developed world, which once prided itself on its apparent economic self-sufficiency, has come to realize that in an age of increasingly scarce natural and mineral resources, global environmental threats accelerate international illegal migration and burgeoning world trade. It too is becoming very more economically dependent on the developing world. We have seen that whereas 3 decades ago, this interdependence was perceived primarily in terms of dependence of poor nations on the rich ones. Today, the situation is different. Third world countries are now the fastest growing export markets for developed countries. Let there be no misunderstanding, however, poor nations are now and will remain considerably more vulnerable to the economic event and policy of rich countries than vice versa. Now, we have section 1, statement of problems and main issues. I will begin this chapter with the theoretical sources to understand a number of critical questions about economies of third world countries, especially sub-Saharan backwardness. Basically, some questions about first, the real meaning of development, and how can different economic concepts and theories contribute to a better understanding of development process. The source of national and international economic growth. 3. Who benefits from such growth and why? Why a few poor countries make rapid progress toward development while the majority remain objectively poor. Next, the, under, the underdevelopment as an internationally, domestically, or externally, internationally induced phenomenon. 6. What can be learned from the historical record of economic progress in the now developed and the newly transitional economies? Next, the initial conditions similar or different for contemporary low developed country LDCs from what developed countries faced on the eve of their industrialization. Next, how can improvement in the role of status of women have an especially beneficial impact on development prospects, as quoted the African Development Bank in 1995. I recall to the African Development Bank that they gave me a flyer where they said that our development of African countries will be by the women. We continue the next. How did third and fourth world get into such serious foreign debt problems? And what are the implications of this debt for economics of both less developed and more developed nations? And the last question, do developed countries owe any debt to poor third and fourth world? Say as it appears within their import-export business balance of payment as regarding Africa, especially sub-Saharan countries, when the 65% balance payment of their export bills confer, you can see General History of Africa, UNESCO, 1993. That is the reference. Will be paid to them. When? I repeat, as regarding Africa, especially sub-Saharan countries, when the 65% balance payment of their export bill will be paid to them. And if that amount recovered, do they still need aid to take off? Then, about when and under what conditions should third world governments adopt a policy of foreign exchange control, raise tariffs, or set quotas on the importation of certain non-essential goods in order to promote their own industrialization or to ameliorate chronic balance of payments problems? What has been the impact of International Monetary Fund stabilization programs and World Bank structural adjustment, lending on the balance of payments and growth prospects of heavily indebted third and fourth world LDC? Full stop. This is also my answer to these two banks who have been sending to me some information, asking me to adhere as you are there now. This is my answer to both of you, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. I cannot do anything that is wrong, as the commerce is completely wrong, statistics wrong. As you know, God does not work with wronged things. No. God wants us to be truthful. And as I said, we have to do a win-win policy everywhere. In the business, everything must be win-win cooperation, win-win games. As you are proclaiming, I'm graceful as you recognize my work, but you don't do what you are talking about to make Africa great in this new 21st century. God says He's with you there where you are all in the hope. Since the first day, although after the discourse, after the speech of the president of United States, the hole is empty. Don't worry. Give your speeches, people of Africa. Continue to give your speeches, people of Asia and people of the South America. Never mind. The Lord will bring you on the table as it is today. Who knew that African voice can be understood in that hole? None. From this 21st century, the decision is taken, and the voice of the black, the nigger, the slaves, your slaves, and the slaves of God is now heard. That is the message that God sent you. I wanted to close, to continue talking about Ethiopia. He asked me to take my book to conclude this video. Take time, brothers and sisters. Listen carefully. What I have shared with you since yesterday, as the Lord is here. The lamb is under my shoulder. Here. The dove on top. And the light of the Lord is shining upon me, telling you all the story that I'm counting. Again, God bless all of you. Let Him open your ears, people of Africa, people of Asia, people of South America, and people of America who are belong to the descent of Africa. People of Australia who are descent of the same link. Listen to God. He is there speaking to us, guiding us. He is the only teacher for us to understand our past and live in our present to build our future. Without him, none can tell us the truth. I have on top of my head the dove. I have on my right hand shoulder here. You have seen it, the presence of God. Lamb who takes away all our sins and bring mercies of the Father to us. Don't be any more afraid when you have to say the truths. Say it with your whole heart. Believe in God and his word. We are the universal family in tsunami that the others has put us. And God is coming to deliver us. You can see how he's clinking. And I'm saying, on your behalf, brothers and sisters, children of God, we are children of God, not the children of Satan, which is those who serve money. We serve our Lord, word. We listen to him. We believe in him. He is the truth. In the oneness of his creation, we are his creature. In the name of God, we say, Amen.